about in Toronto?
Well, this is from commenting on specific cases that are still before the courts, because we know of it only what we hear through media reports, and media reports are for the purpose of, well, not just simply for the purpose of selling newspapers, but they are produced within certain constraints. There's a constraint of time. The reporters have to have a story by next morning, so it can be published. I think since then, much discussion has ensued, and if there were any corrective measures to be taken, we can assume that by now they would have been taken. And so we can take the broad outlines of the reported story to be the case, that a call was made to emergency by a man who said that he had killed his daughter. Emergency teams went to this scene and took this girl to the hospital. Eventually she was pronounced dead. In speaking to some of her classmates, it was found that she had this ongoing dispute with her parents about whether or not to wear the hijab. She didn't want to wear it. They wanted her to wear it. So how do we understand all of this then together? Again, without focusing too much on the particulars of this one story, we can say that in general, there are difficulties in families across the board, whether Muslims or non-Muslims, especially when we're dealing with the intergenerational gap. Many immigrants coming to Canada, for example, will find themselves in a very new cultural context. They may have certain cultural restraints which their children do not feel obliged to remain with. If we think about dating, premarital sex, for example, these are things which people of other faiths would also have some objections to. But their children may not necessarily see the wisdom of those objections and may violate the treasured rules.
So what is the right way to deal with it then?
Well, the right way from an Islamic...
a child who wants to do something that you don't approve of.
From an Islamic perspective, the right way is to use persuasive strategies, and that begins from early childhood. In the early developing years, Muslims have to make sure that their children are receiving the right education, the right coaching, and their minds have to be trained to differentiate between good and bad, so that the child can grow up thinking for oneself as a Muslim and choosing the things which are halal or permissible and staying away from the things which are haram or impermissible.
Now, are you permitted to beat your child then while you're training the child?
In classical times, it was much accepted that a Muslim in reprimanding or training his or her child would use a rod, and there are hadiths to that effect. Of course, nowadays in our present context, we are wary of using such measures because we are studying human psychology, and there are theories that beating a child could actually negatively contribute to the child's development, or restrict the child's mental development, or leave scars, and we don't want to do that. So we should understand that hadiths have reflected to a large extent the state of life the way it was at the time when these hadiths were pronounced. There were only so many options that people could apply, and among the options one had to say, okay, you beat, but not in a very severe way. In our present context, then, we have a variety of strategies that can be used. One can withhold the allowance, for example. One can deny certain privileges but not food. One can, for example, say that your playtime is cut short, or you must go to your room. There's to be a timeout, a separation from the place where one is doing something wrong. So all of these are strategies that should be employed in reprimanding a child. But so far we haven't spoken about the question of the headscarf in particular, which out of that discussion was actually the focal point.
Yes, well, why don't you deal with that then?
Yeah, I feel that's important also because people focus on that, I think, more than is necessary, because sometimes somebody has something that they really want to say to you, and they're waiting for the opportunity, and you say something, and suddenly they blow up.
Yes.
And you're wondering, what did I say to merit all of this sort of response? And it would seem that, for a long time, people wanted to write something about the hijab, and there was no inroad. There was nothing to spark that. And then suddenly this occasion arose, and that sparked the whole discussion. The whole thing became blown out of proportion. But that doesn't...
So what does one do if their child doesn't want to wear the headscarf, for example?
Well, I think it is important to recognize that to wear the headscarf is not an easy thing. And regardless whatever view one takes on the headscarf, one must start with this as a reality. And if men do not understand this, Muslim men should try wearing certain traditional Muslim garments and go ride the train and go to work and so on, and to see how it feels when you interact with others and they look at you funny and they start asking about the strangeness of your garments. And of course, most Muslim men have already experienced that to some extent, or they understand what is at stake, and so most Muslim men just dress like ordinary Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
One would not know from seeing a Muslim man that there's anything Muslim about him, for most Muslim men. So we should start by recognizing that it's not very easy, especially for a young girl growing up in a Muslim family and then going to public school and interacting with non-Muslims. Most people like to be like everyone else around them, and so it is not strange for a girl to start with the hijab from home and then go to school and take it off, because she's trying to live in both worlds. At home, she wants to be the way her parents like to see her. In school, she wants to be the way that her peers would appreciate her. But the solution for that problem is to again, deal with the teachings in a reasonable way, stress the wisdom and beauty of the teachings, so that the younger people who are growing up in the faith will embrace it as their own. They should be wearing the hijab not because mom and dad wants them to wear it, but because they themselves become convinced eventually that this is the right thing to do. This is the better way to present oneself.
But it might not happen immediately, of course. I mean, so children and young people in their teenage years generally experiment and, express their independence. They might have that stage where they just decide that they don't want anything to do with the religion.
Yes. There could be a stage of rebellion as well, where one actually grows up, not normally in the faith, doing everything that pleases mom and dad, and then there comes a few years of rebellion where one wants to assert one's own identity and be oneself, and that could be followed by good years again, years in which the person settles down and realizes, well, these are true teachings. But to get to that final stage, requires education now. It requires that Muslim families have to equip their homes with the books that will help a teenager to grow into Islam.
So how do you do that? Because it's kind of easier when you have children, young children, but then when you have teenagers and you're not really able to communicate with them in the same way, how do you impart those teachings to them?
Well, one way is Muslims have to equip their homes with the learning materials. It'll be surprising to find out how many Muslims do not have an English translation of the Quran in their homes. And how are young children, are teenagers supposed to learn the faith if they do not have English language books that they could respectfully turn to for the guidance that they need?
All right, we'll have to leave it at that, but thank you for your time.
You're welcome.